So ChorePad is the app, and it was an idea our guidance counselor had a couple of years ago when we were just dabbling with check-in, check-out. It's more fun for kids to, when they click on the app, there's a lot of sparkly noises, and they have check marks and trophies and things like that, so they get a lot of immediate fun things when they go through check-in and check-out at the end of the day. It's fairly easy to set up. The screenshots I gave you pretty much shows you what you'd have to work with. Setting up a student is pretty quick. I can get a student up and running in about 5 minutes. When I do an interview with the kid to get when they start check-in, check-out, take their picture, walk them through the app. You set up the rewards ahead of time, and the way we do it, the rewards are the same for everyone unless the student has different needs, and we'll tweak it. The tasks or the chores, I guess, for the app are the same for our students unless, again, we need to make a tweak. So once you plug in the chores and the rewards, it's just a matter of setting the student up, assigning those tasks to the student, and they're off and running. So every morning they go in, and they'll, like I said, if they checked in on time, they get some points for that. If they check out on time, they get points for that as well. If they meet their goal, and just as they gather stars, that's the currency in ChorePad, they can cash those stars in for different rewards, like recess with a friend, 20 minutes at the end of the day in the gym, a popcorn party with their class. The bigger the reward, the harder it is, the more points you need to get that reward. So you have to calibrate how many points they get per day with the rewards that are available to students, if all that made sense.
Mm-hmm. So do you use a regular check-in, check-out form, and then do they get like a point for every, score of 2, or how does that work if they get 80%?
Yep. Very good question. We do. We have a DPR that we use, and we gather those DPRs and put them into the PBIS check-in, check-out app. So that piece, we're gathering data, and we're using the scorecard.
Sorry, Brian, you just faded out.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
That's better.
We do use a scorecard, and we do input that data into the PBIS check-in, check-out app. So that piece we do use. The scorecard, I have the scorecard set up so the kids know what the total amount they could have each day. It's at the bottom of their DPR, 60 points for us.
Okay.
So they get being safe, respectful, and responsible for each class period. And then what 80% of that would be, which for most kids it's at least 48 points. So they know once they add up their points whether they got 80% or not, and then they'll check. To make it simpler, ChorePad is more for them to see, so they get that day-to-day input on, are they meeting their goal? Are they, they having a perfect day? Are they checking in and out on time? And then we get that period-by-period behavior data that we can use for the check-in, check-out app and for our decision-making here.
Who enters the stars? Who enters the points? The teacher or the student?
For the ChorePad app, the students do, with a greeter right there to help.
Okay. So what keeps a student from entering a whole bunch of stars for themselves?
Well, we have the greeter right there. So we have up to 5 students working with a greeter at a time, and the students come in one at a time working with that greeter. And when I interview the student and kind of introduce them to check-in, check-out, and what they'll be doing, I'm pretty frank with them about being honest, and I show them how we can take uncheck things if things are checked when they're not supposed to, and that we're relying on them to work with us and be honest about what they're doing. But there's an adult right there as they do that process, so it'd be pretty hard for them to add check marks if they didn't earn them.
And what grade level is your school? How high up do you use this with?
Here at my school is grades 3, 4, and 5. We are using it down at another elementary school. It's a 1-2 school, grades 1 and 2.
Okay.
Lori, he has a couple more slides. If you want to, he can explain each slide.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so this is the slide I see is the reward slide. This is I just gave you a screenshot as the settings slide. It's fairly simple to work with. Those are your settings right there, not too difficult.
Welcome, Sarah. We're just looking at ShorePad, which is something that Brian shared at our last webinar.
This slide, this would be what a student would look at, and if you were a greeter, you would have more card. It looks like a card. Right? Each student had their own card that they would click on. I only had it set up for one sample student. So a student would find their name, and I would also have their picture in there as well, and they would click on it to open up the screen that they would work in.
Okay.
This would be what the student would see if they wanted to see what their payouts would be. You can see some of the check marks that Mr. Sample Student has had so far. And they have 56 stars so far, or points. None of the payouts are lit up yet so that they can, so indoor recess with a friend. They would have to have at least 75 points or stars to get that. But once they have over 75, if they would like to do that, what's nice is they just click on that, and then the points adjust accordingly. So you don't have to do any bookkeeping. It's just done for you inside the app.
Mm-hmm.
This is the way it would look like when you're creating a chore. So you click on Create, punch in whatever you want students to do. So these are some of the basic things we want students to do every day. Set the days of the week, assign a point value to them. Again, you have to do some calibration depending on what you want students to work toward. Yeah, that works pretty easily. On the bottom, it says Create, and then there's another little button that says Assign. You would click on Assign, and that's where you would match up a student with the task that you want to do. This is what there's a padlock in the upper left-hand corner. When you click on that, it unlocks, and that's where you have some settings that the teacher could use or the greeter to add tasks or add rewards or take things off or add new students. So the student doesn't see the information on the bottom when that padlock is locked. They just see the cards, and yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. They click on their face and away they go.
And so these are the controls for the adults so that they can change the star value or...
Right, yep.
That's so great that you shared that. Very cool. If someone has something that works at the high school level, please let us know so that we can showcase it. Like if someone has a Google Doc or something that they use at high school. You know, at Dave, I think in West Dallas, you had a middle school that came up with a really great Google Doc for check in, check out. I recall. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, it's at one of the middle schools at, what is it called? Quick Check or something like that. It's just something that they set up on the teachers have iPads. It's a Google thing. It's real quick. One of the high schools has something very similar to it that they use for their check-in, check-out with varying degrees of success. So yeah, a lot of it's set up on just like a Google form, and it's real quick for the teachers to put the information in and move on.
Okay. So here are some of the things that we didn't get to that people had questions about from our last one. Entrance and exit criteria, and how you fade students off of check-in, check-out. So that's what we're going to kind of look at a little bit. So entrance criteria, I don't know if you recall, but we had a document called Guiding Questions. And it's one of the things that you worked on in the initial training. And that document you should try to keep with you and alter as you need, because that kind of was the document that designed your intervention. And part of that included what criteria is used to determine if a student should be considered for check-in, check-out. And some of those things, just a minute, minors, attendance, majors 2 to 5 is nationally what people use, but you can alter that depending on what the criteria is at your school. Teacher referral. So all of those things are used to determine, hey, I think maybe the student might need check-in, check-out. The team then looks at that student. They might determine if this would be a good intervention, maybe in terms of motivation. for misbehavior, or how likely it is that the student would like to have that added attention. And then the team decides if they will go on that intervention. So I think with the criteria, basically these are the red flags, and then the team uses their knowledge of the student to see if this would be a good intervention. I again want to just kind of make the distinction between the check and check out intervention and the daily progress reports. That one is the daily progress report is just for progress monitoring. You can use that with all of the interventions and should be using them, whether it is mentoring or SAG or anything else that you have going on with a brief FBA VIP. And check and check out is the intervention that includes the greeter and includes the student taking the form from teacher to teacher. So again, in terms of entrance criteria, you go to what you set up with your this is in the resource section of the participant workbook. And in terms of goals, how do you establish a student's DPR goal, and when have you modified a student's goal? Basically, what the recommendation here is that you create a baseline the first week by having the teacher complete the DPR form for 1 week. Again, I'm talking DPR. The student is not on check-in, check-out yet. They're not going to a greeter. They don't have their hands on the check-in, check-out form. This is just the teacher for 1 week, filling it out, turning it in to whoever is the coordinator for that intervention. And once you have that, you determine a baseline. You want to start the baseline as something where the student can succeed. So you take a look at what it is, say that they're somewhere, at 35% across the board, 35, 45, something like that. You might choose a baseline of 40%. If you don't want to do that baseline data check that first week, then we're just recommending that you begin low to make sure that they will succeed. And then every week after that, you raise the goal by 10%. You don't want to raise the goal until they've succeeded. So what we're assuming is that every week, they make that goal for a week, 80% of the time. The next week, then you'd be at 50%. Maybe they're at 50% for a couple weeks until they get that on for a whole week, and then you raise it to 60%. So you're gradually raising the benchmark. With regard to middle school and high school specifically, and again, this information comes from a seminar or a session that I took at a national conference. So I'm sorry I can't tell you where exactly it came from. It was session J at some national conference. But what they were saying is that at the middle school and high school, include the students in making that goal. So you have the baseline data, but sit down with them and say, okay, well, what do you think? Where do you want to start? Where's someplace that you can be successful? And this is important because kids aren't always very good at goal setting. They'll look at it and they'll say, oh, I can make 75%, and here they are at maybe 30%. So it's an opportunity to really work with the student in terms of what it means to set realistic goals and to be able to move with that. You make sure that the incentives are desirable, and you can use the mystery motivator for intermittent reinforcement when schools make their goal. The mystery motivator is basically something where it would probably be with the greeter, or if you're at middle school and high school and you meet like maybe once a week with whoever is monitoring them. You have like a calendar Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You put X's on, to begin with, on 4 of those days, and then you cover it up with a sticky. And then if they make their goal, and it's a Wednesday, you pick it up, and if it has an X on it, it means that they get a mystery motivator. And you set up the menu with the middle school and the high school students so that it's something that's desirable to them. And then each week you reduce the number of X's that you have. So that's kind of what the mystery motivator is. And again, you include the middle and high school students in creating that. I think that's a good policy even if it's elementary, but it's especially important for middle and high school students. The other piece, and this comes from Leon Hawkins' book, and I would highly recommend getting that book because they just have, it's just a really good book for getting back to basics. She's the one that designed this intervention. But what she says at high school is, at the high school, you kind of have to link behavior to academics. You have to link check-in, check-out to academics. And that might look something like, look, you are a freshman. How many years do you want to stay a freshman? You need to pass this many classes to move on to sophomore status. And right now, it looks like you're failing in these 2 classes, and a lot of it is you're not doing your homework, you're not being responsible, you're not getting to your class on time. So this is an intervention to help you with that. What is your ultimate goal, and how can getting to class on time and completing your homework, how can that help you? So it's important to make that link because that's where the high school students' heads are at. The students can monitor and graph their own progress, determine when they need to have modifications, create their own goals. So you can see that at the high school level, they have much more input into this whole process so that they have ownership. And again, she recommends that it's best for freshmen and sophomores who struggle with academic or social difficulties. So given how many students there are in a high school setting, if you say students that have 2 to 5 ODRs and have this many truancies or whatever, those students are going to automatically go on check-in, check-out. You might have way too many students. This is a way to make sure that this intervention is used for the students who it can make the most impact with, fitting the intervention for the student. I want to pause there and just get people's input on some of the things that I said. And I'm fine to call on people.
We are going to be doing some high school specific technical assistance sessions. Those are not scheduled yet, but we will announce them on this during these sessions at some point. So, and in other ways through your technical assistance coordinators in your regions. So any questions? Go ahead.
Well, I'm just I'd like to just kind of unmute someone or have someone unmute and give me your feedback. Katara, can you unmute and just tell me what you think about this piece, what I've shared so far? If you are using that in your school system or what thoughts you have about it.
Okay, so just to FYI, I don't necessarily work with high school, so I wouldn't really know that aspect.
Right, but what about the piece in terms of goal setting, which was for any grade?
Well, for our behavior, we have our goals where it's 80% already in place, and our baseline is 40% already. So we already have that kind of set for the teachers or for the schools.
Okay. So you just start with 40%. You don't necessarily do that week of progress monitoring or, just to get baseline?
No, for behavior, our baseline is all 40%.
Okay. And do you increase every week by 10%? How do you do that?
No, it stays at 40%, and we just monitor their progress. And everyone's goal is 80%. 80% of the time. If you didn't hear
Okay, I'm a little confused. You start at 40%.
That's
How
the
did it get to 80%?
That's just the overall goal that we set. 80% for 80% of the time.
Okay. So you don't start lower with any students?
Not generally.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself now.
Okay. Josh, can you unmute? Josh?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I'm going to find the little button.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your question?
Well, when you do baseline, do you go a week before you set your goal, or how do you do your baseline?
Yeah, it varies student by student. We look at the kid and we look at a whole handful of things that are impacting their day-to-day behavior and academics and things outside of school, things that are out of our control. And we try and decide if it would be best for us to do it in the classroom with the teachers, or if we should just set it at 40% if that's realistic, or some kids are even higher than that. But so there's not a right way for a wrong way for any kid. It just varies for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
One of the pieces, and I'm just going through a little bit for middle school and high school because it was one of the questions that we had, is once a student is reaching 80%, decrease the number of times a student has to check in with teachers from 5 to 3 to 1. And the student monitors themselves and asks the teachers to confirm. And I think that's a good fade out for any student. Especially like third, fourth, fifth, somewhere in there. First and second, maybe not. But what you want to try to get at is you want the student to be able to have internalized when they're meeting expectations and when they're not. So having them complete the form and give it to the teacher who initials to say they agree is one of those steps. And one of the things that Leon Hawkins says is to be really cautious about withdrawing the intervention too soon. The behavior needs to stabilize for several weeks. So that speaks to when do you begin to discontinue the intervention. And I know for me, when I began looking at this, it was always like, I guess in my head was a speakerphone saying 6 to 9 weeks. And after 6 to 9 weeks, you know, if that's it. If they don't have that, you take them off after 9 weeks or you add an intervention. This is a little different than that. This is saying give yourself some room to make sure that it's stabilized before you take them off the intervention. And that's especially true for the middle school and high school, but I think it's true for all.
To chime in on your session today and just talk a little bit about what does our systems and what do our systems look like and what does that mean for our students with IEPs. And really this first one is a message that is being sent from the U.S. Department of Education that's really saying students with disabilities must be a part of our overall systems, and we need to create those conditions for that learning for all. So it's not just a Wisconsin thing that we're talking and sharing this message, or just the RTI Center. This really is much larger and really is ultimately the message that they are wanting to be sent. So some of this is really just taking a look at some of the research that is out there around staff attitudes regarding students with IEPs. And it's really taking a look at that educators who have negative attitudes towards students with disabilities. They tend to have that lower achievement, that expectation of lower achievement, and the inappropriate behavior, and we're expecting those behaviors. Some of the negative attitudes, actions of others negatively affect the behavior, social relationships, education, employment, and health of individuals with disabilities. Not probably anything that is new information for many of you. And so this is one, just recently I was participating in a session that they talked about some of the research out there regarding polling of educators. And when they polled educators, it was really that idea of finding out, when we make the statement, all students can learn, the educators that are in our schools, do you agree with that statement or do you disagree with that statement? And when they did this, this poll, what they found is that there are only 60% of our educators in the schools today that truly agree with that statement, and there are 40% that disagree. And I know for me, that was just really kind of seeing, I'm a statistics person. My former life is that of a school psychologist. And so when I look at those numbers, that's really alarming to me to think of 2 out of 5 educators in our schools today truly do not believe that all students can learn. And so think about that and think about your schools and the culture within your schools around that. And this is just more that start getting at some of the beliefs when we are working with students with the emotional behavioral disabilities. And some of the research that has found is really getting at that. Teachers feel very stressed. They feel that there has been very limited training in reference to, where schools keep hearing, students with disabilities need to be included in our classrooms. We need to have inclusive environments. And then, but let's take a look at the support. What support and professional development is being offered to our educators to really support that. Hopefully there are things in place, there's coaching available, there's mentoring, but there's also those opportunities for our educators to really learn more of what does that mean for me within my personal classroom. And so again, kind of thinking about what are some things that we have in place, because ultimately when we are all put in situations that we're not always very initially comfortable or know how to respond or react, we are going to have some more of that resistance. So how are we providing the support to the educators in our schools around that? And then as we start looking at our school system and our cultures, thinking of these questions, are students with IEPs included within our school-wide data? Is there a belief around students with IEPs being taught in separate classrooms? And really go back to the mission and the vision within your school. And are all educators in your building truly working toward that mission? And I know often the conversation is, well, yes, of course, that's what we do every day. And then I challenge you to take a look and ask the question, okay, but what does that look like? And really kind of asking the question, is there a mismatch to what we say we believe and the actions that we are doing? And I often go at the idea of, when we say all is all, when we're talking about providing instruction, and then we start asking more specifics around what does that look like for our students with IEPs, and say, well, I'm not sure because they receive their instruction down in the classroom at the end of the hall. And so it's really, do your practices truly match the beliefs of your building? And so kind of reflecting on this, it's really kind of going and taking a look at the practices happening in your schools today. Is are students with IEPs included in your school-wide discipline data, and really asking why or why not? Are the beliefs reflective in their actual practices? Again, are we capturing data differently for our students with IEPs? And then at the same time, do you have those same behavioral expectations for our students with disabilities or with IEPs? And how are we bridging those opportunities and bridging for life beyond school for students? And so what I would like is to really kind of think about that right now. And I don't know, within the either chat box or if people would like to chime in, just to kind of share, what are some challenges around and reflecting on your current practices? Are there things that you are doing that you believe are really working and you're having evidence of that? Taking a look at the culture in your school around the beliefs in supporting students with IEPs within your system, your overall system, or even with your data. So if people want to share, are there particular challenges that they are facing, encountering, or are there things that are going really well? So again, feel free to put something in the chat, or if we could at least have one or two people kind of share out.
I just have a question of people. Do we have the option to raise our hands on here or not?
Yep.
I don't see it on mine. I don't see it on mine. Do we, Stephanie?
Well, Dana, can you tell if you can raise your hand?
You know what? I am not seeing the option on mine.
Yeah, okay. This is the question I have. My question is this third one about is your data collection system. Mm-hmm. Are all office discipline referrals for special ed students entered in your data system? If they are, and you know they are, can you raise your hand? And otherwise, don't raise your hand. So I just have a question. Are all office discipline referrals for special ed students entered into your data system? And we won't track this, so.
No.
Right now I'm seeing that that's not so for anyone.
Okay. Well, and somebody shared in the chat that all of our EBD students use DPRs and data is entered in the PBIS check-in and check-out app. Students with other disabilities follow the same data rule for entering check-in and check-out as well. And then
The expectation in Milwaukee is that all students are included in behavior interventions. This includes special ed.
we include all. Okay, great. And that is great to hear. Just kind of giving some background. Across the state, we have been engaging in a lot of conversations and really hearing that that is not the case. So to hear that many of you are including their data, and really what we are ultimately looking for is creating that efficient and effective system for all. And it's really taken a look at how are we using one data system that can get at meeting a broader spectrum of needs, and really trying to create that efficiency and understanding and that consistent messaging then within our schools as well. So
And,
thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I know that there are schools that I work with that is not the case, because they feel that there would be way too many referrals and they would all come from one student, because they have some students with severe, especially EBD students, that would probably have a referral a day at least. So
Yep.
they feel that that would skew the data, and so they have a different system for tracking that data.
And that is a lot of what we are hearing as well, Lori, so thank you for sharing that. And it's really getting to that question of how are we utilizing and making the connection from that systems level data all the way to individual IEP goals. And one of that is really kind of taking a look at our school-wide expectations and really kind of identifying, you know, what are some of the strengths, and then what are some of the challenges and needs that we are capturing within their present level, and then within that making the link to their particular IEP goals as well. So we are really providing some of that bridging between our school-wide expectations to specific individual targets within a student's IEP. So we'll keep going here, being conscious of the time. And so, you know, Rob Horner, I loved his statement of when he shared, you know, equality means we don't find a place for her, we make this the place for her. And really kind of taking a look again at our schools and that understanding, and also some of that research that says the single largest reasons move away is related to social behavior. The single largest reason that teachers leave is also due to that social behavior. So come back to the culture within your school and the retention of our staff and our educators wanting to stay in our schools, and what does that look like, and asking some of those questions. So when we support our students with IEPs within our PBIS framework, what are some things that we can kind of do up front is getting at that, you know, prepping at the start of the year, and really, especially when we start looking at students that have clearly identified mental health needs and other behavioral needs, how are we preparing them for a successful start at the beginning of the year? Taking a look at those pre-teaching opportunities, some of those practice times. How are we providing that support to our educators that are working with the students, and really providing them the support that they may be looking for and need in reference to that successful bridge and transition as well. Some other things is really taking a look at how are we identifying what is the process we have within our system to take a look at the replacement behaviors and identifying what those particular behaviors are. And, you know, when we take a look at what does our FBA process look like, where within our system, and how are we taking a look at that and utilizing, you know, the simple FBA in comparison to when do we make that decision as to the more complex FBA and when that comes into play, and really taking a look at those replacement behaviors and where are those opportunities and how are we providing opportunities of practice, and that messaging again kind of coming back to keeping the high expectations and the standards within our school. and then teaching some of those techniques, and again, working with our staff and giving them those opportunities. We often get a lot of question about transitioning back through to general education, especially if we have self-contained programs within our schools, is how are we again providing that bridge? And this is where we say linking back to our school-wide language and messaging and using those expectations really as the high standard, and kind of saying, providing that bridge back to really have that consistent messaging and giving the opportunity so they can be successful as they transition back out of a self-contained setting. And this is really, again, kind of conversations, if they're not already happening within your schools, is taking a look and reflecting on your overall system at how effective is your current system for all of your students as you're disaggregating that data and seeing, are there programs that are showing greater success, and are there some that we're really not seeing the growth that we would like to see, and really analyzing that further to say, you know, there are some great things happening, but we're still not seeing the intended results. So how are we then approaching and making that connection? Do we have that bridge between the supports we're providing through special education and then linking back to our overall and school-wide? And really kind of diving in to take a look at what supports are in place for all of our students, and including what are some of those that may be specific for our students with IEPs, and where is there a crossover between them. And then we look at our special educators to really start taking a look to say, you know, what is their role within our school-wide system, and what does that look like? And then what opportunities does our system provide for them to be collaborating and truly utilizing that expertise more school-wide for them? And now more specific as we start taking a look at Tier 2 and we look at check-in and check-out, at the idea of one of the big questions we hear, one of the concerns is that often when check-in and check-out is in place in your school, if a student has an IEP, so often it's the automatic assumption that the individual that's going to do the check-in and check-out will be the special education teacher of which that student is on their caseload. And I guess real quick, if I could just kind of either get somebody in the chat box, or if somebody would like to chime in, just to kind of see, you know, who typically is the greeter for your students with IEPs in your schools, just to kind of get a feel for what you all have happening.
Why don't I just kind of unmute? Let me see. Amanda, can you unmute? Who's the greeter for your students that have IEPs?
I was just typing it into the box, but basically we let the students kind of decide that. If I will say, you know, is there somebody that you would like to check in and out with? And oftentimes that would be one of the support staff or special education teachers who work with them frequently, but there are several of our students who also have regular ed classroom teachers that they choose to check in or out with. So we kind of leave it up to them so that they have some choice and control over it, so they're a little more bought into the program.
Okay.
Great, great.
Beth?
We have a couple of people that chatted. Greg said case manager if check-in, check-out is part of IEP. Greeter if check-in, check-out is through Tier 2. Josh said mainly case managers for students with IEPs. Our PBS coached with our 504 students and regular ed students. Christopher Robinson said our students with IEPs have the special ed teacher or para as a greeter. And Dave Stanley said typically it is the student's case manager. Case managers use the DPR to help gather data for IEP goals, but it also depends on the level.
Okay, thank you. And really, you know, just kind of hearing some of that, there is a lot of variation, and that is something that we are seeing. And one of the questions that I often come back to is thinking about what are the expectations for check-in and check-out? When you're just talking check-in and check-out itself, and Stephanie and Lori, if one of you would want to share for first, is it often, I know In the past, we talked a lot about typically it is not their general education teacher that you're really kind of looking to establish a relationship with another, someone that's not their day-to-day. Is that still something that you guys kind of share or kind of recommend?
Yes, it should not be the teacher that they have.
And that's the experience. And so I challenge the schools that have their special education or case manager as that greeter to say, are we moving away from what the intent of check-in and check-out is in reference to that relationship development? And again, we all recognize there are going to be those individual situations, specific cases that, you know what, this truly is the best for this student. And by all means, that's what you want to go. And hearing some of the chats and the responses is that some of you are really taking those things into consideration. And our big thing is to be sure that we are truly taking a look and asking the question around, okay, are we really assigning an intervention based on the label of a student, meaning they have an IEP, so it's this person, or are we truly coming down to focus on what is the student need, not the label that is driving the support we are providing?
And I
so
just want to, I want to understand something with all of check-in, check-out. The drift or the tendency is to start individualizing and not to begin with generic. And the intent of the intervention is really to begin the majority of students on check-in, check-out. And we give you some latitude because sometimes you may think, hey, for sure we know right up front this is going to happen, but that should be a small number. And if it isn't, then my question is, are you sure that you are getting the right population of students? Because check-in, check-out is supposed to be a little bit more an entry-level intervention and maybe waiting too long before you use check-in, check-out. But I'm really going to ask you to take a look at your systems and see how many check-in, check-out students have individualized check-in, check-out and how many really have generic, where you have a few assigned greeters. They go at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, and that's it. Versus maybe, and I have a slide that goes into some of the different ways you can individualize.
Okay.
So just in terms of the intervention itself.
Very good. Thank you, Lori.
Mm-hmm.
And really kind of the last thing is really kind of how do we start having some of these conversations? And something I was recently a part of kind of phrased it this way is that to start flipping the conversation. Rather than when a student has an IEP and immediately saying, well, we have to do this, and then how are they fitting into the gen ed? Flip the conversation to say, let's take a look at what's happening within those universal expectations, that school-wide expectation, and really breaking down into isolation, what is the individual need within there? What is the breakdown? So looking bigger picture, but then also going into, obviously there are supports in place for the student and interventions within our school-wide systems. Breaking down further what part of the intervention itself may not be working for the student. Is it the protocol of the intervention? Is it one piece within the intervention itself that's not working? So it's really coming back to the isolating the need and really building from there and providing the support around that need rather than saying, well, this whole intervention is not working for this student. Let's be sure that we are taking a look at kind of that root cause analysis and breaking into further what is that support and focusing and gearing the attention at that for the success of the overall support for the student. And ultimately it's coming back to, are we holding the students to those same high expectations? Recognizing, yes, there's going to have to be differentiation or some scaffolding, but in the end, are the students still seeing that our expectation of them is that they will hold them to those expectations of all students, but knowing there is going to be that scaffolding to get there. And it's really getting back at that message of holding and having those high expectations for our students with IEPs as we have those same high expectations for all students within our buildings.
Why don't we open it up for comments?
Yep, thank you, Lori.
We'll just have a few minutes, so I'd kind of like to hear from people.
You're welcome to chat in the chat box or just speak. Also, if you would like to know more about or talk more about this topic, please let us know that so we can continue this conversation in the future.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Oh, there we go. This is Denise, speaking with the students with IEPs as our general education students first. I think the RTI process is really helping our teachers to understand that, in that we include them also in interventions, and that's different than their IEP goals. So I think the same is with the behavior. They have their specific IEP goals, but they can also be included in the Tier 2 interventions. So I think really through the RTI process, it's really helping teachers understand more the behavior side of including students with IEPs, if that makes sense.
It does, Denise, and thank you very much for sharing that. And that's great to hear. And it's really coming back to, again, continuing to make those connections and links back from those IEP goals to the school-wide, to their interventions again. So thank you for sharing.
I also like the point that just because a student is on an intervention doesn't mean it has to be part of their IEP.
Yes.
Josh said, great point on the last slide, general education students first.
For if you would like to add anything in the chat box or comment, if you want to continue this conversation, especially maybe Lori's last thing that she said before Josh's comment, or future topics that you would like to discuss. We are not going to be meeting in December. We canceled the December session, so our next session is January, and I believe it's January 19th. Lori, is that what the slide says?
I don't have my calendar book here, sorry.
It's on the slide. January 19th at 3 o'clock. So any questions for Dana?
I just gave you the screen back to Stephanie.
Okay. And I know we wanted to get to check in, check out with individualized features, but I guess we will save that.
And again, too, I just want to offer, if there are other specific questions in reference to students with IEPs, feel free to connect with me directly as well.
Oops.
Otherwise, thank you for joining us.